Do you have $10,000 or more in credit card debt? Maybe you're even barely getting by making minimum payments. With credit card debt hitting record highs, National Debt Relief offers real debt relief solutions for people struggling to keep up. These options may reduce a large portion of credit card debt for those who qualify. You don't need to declare bankruptcy, and you may be able to pay back less than you owe, regardless of your credit. National Debt Relief has already reduced the credit card debt for more than 550,000 consumers. So don't wait. If you owe 10, 20, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, you can now take advantage of this financial debt relief as the cost of living increases. To find out how much you could save, visit nationaldebtrelief.com. That's nationaldebtrelief.com.
Hello, your friendly neighborhood host here again, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time on the life of Joe Sinott, one of the great inkers of the comic book medium. Of the many unheralded jobs in comic books, inkers are one of them, especially since that infamous scene in Kevin Smith's 1997 film classic Chasing Amy, in which they are accused of being tracers, specifically Banky, played by a stalwart Kevin Smith actor Jason Lee. In truth, inkers provide an essential job in comic books, as they help enhance and interpret the original art the pencilers laid down, fixing mistakes and setting the mood. A good inker can save sloppy art, while a bad inker can ruin good draftsmanship. Many are also pencilers in their own right, using their talent to help out the artist. Simply put, a good inker is needed in comics, and one of the greatest was Joe Sinott, who worked on nearly every Marvel book from the 1960s to 1980s, enhancing the pencils of legendary artists like Jack Kirby, John Buscema, and George Perez. As much as Kirby and Steve Ditko, it was Sinott who helped develop the classic Marvel look that made their comics so popular, and he is a prime example of the importance of inkers. Joe Sinott was born on October 16, 1926, in the Catskill Mountains, Sagittarius, New York, one of 7 children to Catherine and Edward Sinott. He demonstrated his drawing skills at age 3 in kindergarten with his first box of crayons, which he received from a teacher that stayed at the boarding house his mother ran. Sinott started drawing everything he could find before eventually copying strips like Terry and the Pirates and Flash Gordon. He also loved Congo Bill and Action Comics #1 over Superman because he was similar to Jungle Jim, the comic strip by Alex Raymond, creator of the Flash Gordon. Sinott also loved movies, radio dramas, and serials like many kids of his time. As he got older, Sinott served as the art director of his high school yearbook, though he was disappointed that his schools only presented 2 classes on representation and design as far as art instruction. Thus, he had to learn anatomy from comic books. After high school, Joe Sinott enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War II with the Fighting Seabees in Okinawa, driving a munitions truck. It was part of ceding to his mother's wish not to be drafted into the Army, as his brother Jack had died while serving in the U.S. Army's 3rd Division. After completing his service in May of 1946, Sinott admitted to piddling around for 3 years, playing sports while working in a limestone quarry in his father's cement manufacturing plant. However, the winter of 1948 in New York would be one of the coldest in history, and unable to go outside, Sinott finally decided to go to school. Sinott went to the Cartoonist and Illustrated School, CIS, now called the School of Visual Arts, in March of 1949 on the GI Bill, submitting his art samples to Silas Rose, the CIS head, who then gave them to Bernie Hogoff, the school's head instructor. Both were impressed by Sinott's samples, and especially since he had no training, which got him into the school. There he was instructed by numerous professional artists the school would bring in, notably Milton Caniff, the legendary comic strip artist of Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon. Another instructor was Tom Gill, famous as the penciler of the Lone Ranger comics by Dell, and he would help Sinott get into the comic book industry directly. Soon, Joe Sinott had his first professional work published with his feature Trudy in Mopsy #12 on September of 1950. That same year, he married his fiancée, Betsy Kurlaski, in August during the school's 2-week vacation. They will be married for 56 years until her death. Tom Gill was one of the original instructors at the Cartoonist School since 1948 and would mentor numerous talented artists during his tenure, such as Herb Trimpe, who we mentioned in the previous episode. While teaching, he still maintained accounts with Timely, the future Marvel, Fawcett, and of course Dell, teaching during the week while working nights and weekends for his comic book companies. Joe liked Joe Sinott's talent and made him one of his assistants. Sinott would work with Joe for 9 months while attending school, working nights and taking the Long Island Rail to Joe's studio to work for all weekend. Soon, Sinott was doing most of the work on some assignments, such as Kent Blake Detective, which he penciled and inked. Figuring he was ready to set out on his own, plus having a wife to support now, Sinott made his play for Timely through Stan Lee, figuring he couldn't turn him down. Despite leaving Tom Gill, he and Joe Sinott would remain friends, and Sinott credits working for Tom Gill as one of the best teaching experiences he ever had. After graduating the cartoonist school, Joe Sinott went to Atlas, the future Marvel and former Timely. Founder Martin Goodman loved to avoid paying taxes, and to work with Stan Lee in 1951. Sinott also returned to his hometown of Sagittarius after leaving New York City for 3 years due to school. Reportedly, he approached Lee directly, pointing out that he did most of Gill's work on Red Warrior and Kent Blake. Impressed, Lee handed Sinott a script, The Man Who Wouldn't Die, which would later appear in Apache Kid number 8. And the rest, according to Sinott, is history. While there, Sinott stated that Stan Lee was a brilliant writer, able to produce stories in nearly every genre, from westerns to science fiction, and would eventually leave school as his work got more steady, doing features like The Adventures in the Town, The Arizona Kid, and Arrowhead. However, things took a downturn when Frederick Warren published his book, The Seduction of Innocent, in 1954, which blamed comic books for juvenile delinquency. This led to the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency, which forced the comic book industry to form the Comics Code Authority, regulating its content, as a result, restricting the industry and practically banning horror comics. More than a few of those Sinott did features for, such as Only 12 of Us May Live, Cry Werewolf, and Drink Deep Vampire. While the public decried these horror tales, Sinott said artists like him loved them because they really got to cut loose with their talent. During his early run at Atlas, Sinott produced 1,300 pages for the comics like Adventures in the Fear, The Arizona Kid, and Battlefront, but with the new CCA, Sinott soon found himself looking for work and nearly didn't get it at DC, as he was a Marvel guy, according to one editor. Thankfully, another editor grabbed Sinott before he left, saying he liked his art and gave him a work. With comics on the downturn, what work Sinott could get was less than before, with Stan Lee being forced to cut page rates at Atlas in 1957 to 58 due to losses in sales. Some artists went into advertising, teaching, or just left the business altogether. As for Joe Sinott, he suffered as well, having to leave Atlas for a 6-month period, while his page rate was cut from the average of $46 to $21. He was working commercial advertising while finding works at Classic Illustrated in Charlton, and even worked with Vinnie Coletta, his first inker. By 1963, they would produce 600 romance stories, 27 pages total for Charlton, especially for Coletta, who was adept at depicting the beautiful women. Sinott would call Coletta one of a kind, able to get the job done, though it would take a shortcuts that altered the art originally penciled. Of interesting note, due to the nature of Sinott working in Sagittarius, he only met Vinnie Coletta in person for the first time in 1975 at a comic book convention. In 1959, Joe Sinott rejoined Marvel Comics, the former Atlas, when Stan Lee called stating they were back in business. However, due to the new CCA restrictions, he could no longer show direct violence as before. He was also doing Treasure Chest and Fun Facts, which did features on historical figures from Babe Ruth to JFK. Sinott also worked on the monster books, which were trendy in 1961, inking It Was Trapped by Titans, the monster that time forgot, for Tales to Astonish number 10. This would be one of the first times Sinott worked with Jack Kirby, who previously inked most of his own pencils. Sinott also inked Jack Kirby's pencils on Doom Under the Deep in Battle number 69 in April of 1950, and then Sinott worked on the Fantastic Four number 5, which featured the first appearance of Dr. Doom. Of note, Sinott didn't even know what the Fantastic Four was due to living in the Catskills and thus was out of the comic scene. Joe Sinott's work schedule was at 7:45 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and he credited his inking skill with balancing blacks with the panels on the page. On Friday, Sinott would show up at the Marvel offices with his completed assignment, and Stan Lee would give him a new script, which he then took back home and worked on from Monday to Thursday before returning again. All this was done by mail, while Sinott never went to New York City except on special occasions and, of course, to visit the offices. Thus, he wasn't aware of everything that was going on and how Marvel was suddenly reviving the comic book industry. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby loved Sinott's ink so much they offered him the following issue of Fantastic Four number 6, but he was committed to doing Treasure Chest, the story of the Pope's project, thus he had to turn it down. Sinott did ink Jack Kirby's pencils on Journey into Mystery number 83, August of 1962, which was the first appearance of Thor, along with doing the cover. And after his treasure chest assignment was complete, he penciled and inked 5 more Thor stories in issues number 91 to 92, 94 to 96, from April to September of 1963. Thor would be one of the big characters Sinott loved inking, along with Captain America, the Hulk, and the Silver Surfer. As for Fantastic Four, Sinott wouldn't return to the comic until issue number 44 in November of 1965, and would continue for 48 issues in number 92, then coming back for number 95 to number 101. Sinott loved the art and story by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were producing, and he would join them in introducing the Silver Surfer, Galactus, the Inhumans, and the Black Panther, all which was done in the epic issues number 44 to 52 run on Fantastic Four, still the high watermark of that comic book series. Once again, due to the nature of his work being an inker, Sinott never met Jack Kirby face-to-face in 1972. As Sinott, of course, rarely visited the Marvel offices, mostly just worked out of his studio in Sagittarius. Sinott also stated that the level of detail that Kirby put into his pencils made it a lot of work, but was definitely satisfying, as he considered Kirby one of the fastest but most versatile artists to ever work in the business. He even did work in the unfinished Fantastic Four number 102 due to Jack Kirby leaving abruptly from Marvel to go to DC, which he received the unfinished pages in 2006 with finished art by Ron Frenz. Sinott would continue to ink Fantastic Four up to the 300s, along with the Silver Surfer and the Mighty Thor, working with the likes of John Buscema, John Byrne, and George Perez. Of the artists, John Byrne, he would note on Fantastic Four, he would find himself correcting his mistakes at first, such as the neck length and the hairstyle. Part of the job of inkers is to correct these mistakes, as they're essentially artists themselves. Perez, he noted for his hyper-detailed pencils and ability to maintain continuity. Sinott said you could have made a stamp of pencils that Perez penciled. Joe Sinott continued to find work outside of Marvel as well, like Classic Illustrated number 554 on September 1958 on the feature The Enchanted Deer, while also working on America's Best Comics, Charlton and Dell. One notable work was penciling the one-shot biographical issue of the Beatles on November of 1964. However, by 1965, Sinott was nearly exclusive at Marvel, inking on nearly every Marvel title and helping establish the Marvel look that helped make the company so popular. He loved working on the Avengers, such as issue number 100 by Barry Windsor Smith, due to the characters like the Scarlet Witch, Captain America, and Hawkeye, one of his favorites. However, Sinott also loved working with Al Milgrom on the West Coast Avengers even more. He also working on Jim Starnenko's pencils on Nick Fury in Strange Tales number 166 and 68 and Nick Fury number 1, along with Captain America number 110 to 111. One thing he didn't like, though, was inking vehicles and stagecoaches and motorcycles, which he considered too much work. In the 1970s, Joe Sinott was so ingrained at Marvel that you weren't considered a Marvel guy until he inked your pencils. And he would work on nearly every book that the company published, along with every artist from Jack Kirby to Neil Adams to Gil Kane. For the rookies like Jim Starnenko and Neil Adams, he would tweak their art in the right directions and his inks before they became the seasoned professionals we know today. By this point, Sinott was the old man at Marvel, with 20-plus years at the company and using his wisdom and experience to guide young artists. Some artists needed a lot of more work, like John Buscema, whose art became so loose on books like Nova and Miss Marvel that Joe Sinott received a finished art credit over inking, while Buscema was credited with giving layouts over penciling. Sinott soon became friends with many of them, like Ron Frenz and Terry Austin, while receiving high acclaim from the rest of his comic book peers from his talent and professionalism. Outside comic books, Joe Sinott loved sports and Bing Crosby, and as a result, he penciled several sports comics, illustrating the stories of Mickey Mantle, Brooks Robinson, and Pete Rose, while also doing covers for magazines like Crosby Magazine and the Bing Crosby Fan Club. Sinott also worked in advertising in the 1960s and 70s as well, such as album covers and Hostie's Twinkies ads, which featured for Marvel, which featured the character Thor. To develop his technique when he was younger, Joe Sinott copied comic strips like The Phantom and Johnny Hawk about a college athlete. As an adult and professional artist, Sinott inked Marvel strips as well, such as Spider-Man, which he started back in 1992, and the Hulk, which he did for a short time as well. Through Spider-Man, he got to work with Stan Sakai, who lettered the strip, and it credits Sinott with being able to help meet his deadlines, as, of course, he's also busy with his Yoshagi Yojimbo comic. Sinott would retire from comic books to concentrate on inking the Amazing Spider-Man Sunday strip in 1992 and continued on in the series till it ended on March 22nd of 2019. With the strip's end, Joe Sinott officially retired from the comics industry at the age of 92. He did sporadically work during that time on Marvel Comics as well, such as inking the Captain America #1, Volume 6 variant cover by John Romita Sr., which is cover dated on September of 2011. Today, Joe Sinott is considered one of the three greatest inkers in comic books, next to Frank Giacoia and Dick Giordano. He has received near universal praise from nearly every artist he's ever worked with, from Herb Trimpe to Murray Severn, and numerous awards for his contributions to the comic book medium. Notably, the Inkpot Award in 1995, the Inkwell Hall of Fame in 2008, of which he is named after in honor of that year, and the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2013. On July 27, 2007, the post office issued 2 commemorative stamps of The Thing and the Silver Surfer, which is penciled by Jack Kirby and inked by Joe Sinott. Today, Joe Sinott is still alive and living in retirement with a legacy as one of the greatest inkers to ever work in comics. He's a true example of the need of their job in the comic book art, and know that inkers are not just tracers. I would like to thank the chief source for this episode, Brushstrokes with Greatness, The Life and Art of Joe Sinott by Tim Lasute, a great overview of his life with interviews from Sinott and many of his comic book colleagues, along with beautiful reprints of his art. A must-read for any comic book fan. And now is March 26, 2026, time for the favorite comic of the week. Superman Spider-Man, #1 from DC and Marvel Comics, featuring various DC writers and artists. That is, of course, this is the company crossover DC Marvel event where they're crossing over their 2 flagship characters, the Superman and Spider-Man. And in this is the one that's produced by DC, and it features various artists by like Mark Waid, Jorge Jimenez, Tom King, Jim Lee, and so forth. It's just a great mix of stories about the 2 characters interacting. And what's best about this is that, unlike they're doing like a multiple dimensions thing, they're just acting like they're in the same universe. And the main story by Mark Waid and Jorge Jimenez is just Peter Parker and Clark Kent working together on a reporting job. He's the photographer for Clark Kent, working as a reporter, and they end up having to fight up against Brainiac and Dr. Octopus. There's a lot of great stories that are mixed in there too. There's a Tom King, Jim Lee story that sees Lois Lane and Mary Jane team up to help their superhero loves, which is a great read. And just a great combination. There's Spider-Man 2099, Batman Beyond, and Superboy in the Future mix it at one point. And a really crazy one by Gail Simone and Bella Ortega, in which a Power Girl goes on a blind date and ends up with a Punisher. And the best part is her blind date is Paul Raven, who is depicted as the complete loser that he is and always will be, because he's the worst character in comic books created in a very long time. And he should be, if he's going to be in a comic book, he should be treated like the loser that he is, thank goodness. But this is just, for getting in, just a fun, great book. Great storytelling, great arting in general. And similar to like the Batman Deadpool crossover event they did a while back, DC once again nails it. And it's kind of showing that, if you're curious, DC's been killing it in the comic book sales and the trade sales. They're just writing better. They got the opposite universe. And now, as a perfect cherry on top, they're writing better Spider-Man stories than Marvel is right now. That's just embarrassing. But what are you going to do until the House of Ideas rights and ship again? It tends to be, competition. Hopefully they'll get around to it. But until then, you got this great Superman Spider-Man book to read. From getting in one of the best Superman Spider books on the stands right now. So definitely check it out. And with that, that'll be the end of this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for likely another edition. And until then, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And definitely check out this Superman Spider-Man book. If you're a fan of either character, just a great read in general.